Okay, I need to take just a moment and ask you to give me a pastoral moment with you. I have a brand new book here that's entitled Seeing the Roaring Twenties Through the Eyes of an 11-Year-Old Boy. Now, I think I know the answer to this, but was anybody in here 11 during the Roaring Twenties? Probably not. But we have someone who was. This book is by Ray Lennons. And if that wall wasn't there, we could just about see Ray's house through the woods here. And he and his wife Edith lived there as long as I've lived here, and way beyond that. But today is Ray's 101st birthday. And Edith, his wife, passed away last year at 101. He used to love to say, she's older than me. And she was 101, and they'd been married for 78 years. And so I always make it a point when I'm coming from home here to the church campus that I drive around that way so that I can go in front of Ray's house. And I just kind of do like that, and it's my way of reminding myself that I'm praying for you, Ray, and I love you, and loved Edith. We were next door neighbors practically for all those years, and so this morning I did my due diligence, and one of his caretakers was out in the driveway, and she knows the routine, and so she saw me go by and pray, and she jumped in her car, and she almost beat me over here to the back parking lot there, and she said, hey, I saw you praying this morning, and I thought I'd stop by to let you know that it looks like Ray's almost finished, that he's in a transition now. And she said, could be today, and maybe it'll be tomorrow, the next day. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool if he died on his 101st birthday and was able to, so I said to her, her name is Sarah. I love Sarah. She's so sweet. And I said, do you think it's a big step or a little step? She said, it's just a great step. And I thought, you ain't lying, Sarah. You know, Ray's about ready to take that. I just wanted to, and this is a book that he wrote called Seeing the Roaring Twenties Through the Eyes of an 11-Year-Old Boy, and he remembers the 20s. Now let that blow your mind for the last 20s for a while. All right, I'm glad you're here today. This fall preaching series, what we're doing is we're drilling down and taking a closer look, a magnifying look at the values and priorities that St. Mark's Church has lived with basically since the day this church was born. That's why we called it Birthmarks. This one man, Jesus, radically different from anybody else that this world had ever seen, and certainly there has been no one could match him since. So for us, when we started talking about what is it to make Jesus famous, that was kind of a no-brainer for us, but it was also a worthy challenge. When SMC was in its 6th year, it was 1861, our founding pastor, Dr. George Welker, he kept meticulous records, and he wrote in his journal, they were, in 61, the church was organized in 55, but they were getting ready to build their first small sanctuary. It's just a little thing, seat about 90 people, down a little ways from where we're sitting right now. And Dr. Welker wrote this in his journal as they were about ready to break ground on that tiny white church building. When by the hand of God, we lay a foundation for the work for Jesus, we must forever hold on to the encouragement of our forefathers who came here before us. So we will hold to their spirit of adventure. We will break new ground into the unknown future. We cannot see that far ahead, but it is crucial that we see at least to the horizon and to a land yet to be won for Jesus. And nothing has changed around here ever since he wrote those words. The Jesus strategy has always been very clear. It was his idea from the very beginning that here's what he was going to do. He was going to pour his life, everything he had, into a small group of apprentices. Now, in his case, he chose 12 men. He mentored these men for a little more than 3 years. And then he just said, hey, the Spirit of God is going to come, give you power, and then I'm handing it over. You're going to be responsible for the future expansion of this movement. I know you remember his final words. We call it the Great Commission. He said, go and make disciples. And I always like to put the emphasis on the verbs in this in this simple teaching. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you. Well, all the commands could be a big deal. But now you remember the day when a man walked up to Jesus and he said, hey, you seem to be a pretty smart guy. So can you take all the commandments and can you can you net it out for me? Can you pare them down? Can you summarize for me the demands of God? How do you decipher, Jesus? How do you figure this out? What's the greatest commandment, the man said? Here's what Jesus said. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. The second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now look at this. Jesus said the entire law, we're talking the Hebrew scriptures, and all the demands of the prophets are based on those two commandments. Jesus seriously reduced all the commands that he had been given in his Jewish tradition to just two: love God, love people. Just get that right. You can get a whole lot of stuff wrong, but if you get that right, you'll be all right. Jesus' blueprint was surround myself with some apprentices and simply teach them how to love God, love people. And then he said, here's what I want you to do. Go teach people how to love my Father and how to love each other. And then those people will start to teach other people. And that's been the discipleship strategy almost from the first day until now. There's this amazing effectiveness and excellence whenever we're able to do that. Mr. Welker was born on November 3rd, 1817, our founding pastor in Pennsylvania. Somebody taught him the gospel. I don't know. He doesn't write about this. I don't know if it was his mom, his dad, his grandparents, but somebody started teaching him about loving God and loving people. One of the beautiful ways, Jesus had so many great metaphors, but one of the ways that Jesus taught this was he said, I want you to take my yoke on you. A yoke is a device that a farmer uses to be able to connect two or more of the work animals, and then those animals are able to work in tandem with each other. They're able to stay in sync with one another, not only so they can accomplish more work, but also when you yoke two animals together. This is very strategic when Jesus said, take my yoke upon you, because now the load is divided among us and it's just easier for everybody to carry. So the strategy of Jesus was, I want you to yoke people together, find some like-minded people who are devoted to the truth, and then I want you to start working together and walk in sync with all of these like-minded people, and then you'll be able to achieve what I've called you to do. It will be a big task, but it will not seem to be impossible because God will send his Spirit to empower you. It's kind of fun, isn't it, to be yoked with people who are walking in the way with Jesus as we are. But, as you probably know, not everything stays yoked forever. For example, every now and then when I take my car into my mechanic, every so many miles, I think, he will say to me, Bob, the alignment in your car is a little off whack, and so it needs a little attention, and we'll go for it. Cars do that. A marriage, needs to maintain some balance to keep it strong, but perhaps you could testify like I can that sometimes we get a little careless with our marriage, and the alignment based on priorities, starts to get out of whack, and we lose traction, and we need some restoration. Business teams will oftentimes work really hard to be able to keep their teams coordinated and productive. And certainly when a local church is starting together around the mission and vision of their values, we're never going to reach our full redemptive potential until we pause from time to time and say, all right, let's get this right. Let's make sure our alignment is okay. Now, if you've ever attended a church in your life and you couldn't quite figure out what the vision was, it seemed a little fuzzy, or maybe it felt like this church was struggling to communicate and clarify their mission, there might have been a time when you said, well, what do y'all do here? What are your priorities like? And most likely it was because somewhere along the way, the yoke got out of balance. So here was the clear strategy of Jesus. You remember? He said, follow me. That word in the original language means go with me. Walk with me, go where I go, watch me, learn from me, and then go do what I do. In other words, take my yoke on you. That's why everything that we do around here in all directions point in one place, that is, make Jesus famous. And today we celebrate that there are thousands of us who are all yoked together in alignment around one simple vision. It's a powerful thing. Now remember what Jesus did not say. You remember he did not say, people in this world will know you are my disciples if you get your theology right, your doctrines right, your church governance right. No, never. He said, this world will know that you are one of my followers if you love God, love each other. And then his final words, go. Now you get a chance to go. You go and make disciples. You go and start reproducing yourselves. And you do it for as long as you can and then hand it off to some other people because the whole world deserves to know about me. Or as we say here in the South Peak, y'all all go. And you'll figure out how to say that one of these days. But for this to be more than words, somewhere along the way, this has to become personal to you. It's got to be more than just a corporate kind of commitment. Some people go through spiritual calisthenics and they're doing all kinds of spiritual things, going through the motions, but until their relationship with Jesus, until that relationship starts to do something inside of them in a transformational way, then Jesus is just a checklist, or we give Jesus an obligatory head nod, or maybe we just tip our cap to him, or the old traditional fist bump. This can't even when we gather here on the weekends, that's not enough either. We can agree on a mission. We can declare our corporate devotion to the mission. Those are all important, but it has to eventually become a personal thing for you. Or else, we're never going to be successful at echoing the love of Jesus across this community. So what we're going to learn today is one of the best ways it's ever going to happen for you and me is we have to walk out there on a limb. When I was a junior in high school, a bunch of us guys got together one semester and we signed up for a public speaking class. Now this is because the teacher was brand new and somebody said that maybe she's a little naive, and so we thought, well, we'll all sign up and it'll be an easy A and all of that. So we decided that at the very first day of the semester that we would make up imaginary names for ourselves. Now remember, this is in the day before computers, so they didn't have student numbers and IDs and all that sort of thing. So we just made up a whole bunch of crazy names. She bought right into it. We thought, this is going to be great. At the end of the first 9 weeks, she turned in our grades to the main office. Well, you can imagine the shock of the administrators when they started trying to match the grades with these unknown students in our high school. Well, let's just say that the assistant principal, I think Susan said his name was Mr. Clark. I had forgotten Mr. Clark, but he quickly came back to me because let's just say that our little episode was not nearly as clever to Mr. Clark as it was to us. So I was in second period chemistry class and the teacher got a note and she said, hey, you got to go down to the church office. And as soon as I rounded the corner to the administrative offices, I saw all the members, my classmates in the public speaking class, and I knew busted. We had been busted. So what's in a name? Are you good at remembering names? I used to be. Some of y'all used to say, one of these days you aren't going to be remembering names as much as you used to. I guess that warning has come true. Psalm 147:4. God determines the number of stars and he gives each one a name. That's important. Sometime go out on a dark night sky, and if you can get away from the lights in your community or whatever, and there's no moon or anything, look up and you'll say, whew. There are a bunch of stars. Our planet is located in the Milky Way galaxy. And there are about 200 billion stars in our galaxy. Our sun is just one of those stars. The Milky Way Just this one galaxy is so large that traveling at the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, it takes 105 light years to go from one side of our galaxy to the other. One light year now is 5.9 trillion miles. It's big. Everything's big. Now watch this. There are about 125 billion other galaxies, just like ours. Psalm 147 says, God arranged it, calls them by name. You know, if you go to an event, a conference, a group meeting, orientations, conventions, a new member class, meet and greets, class reunion, if you've ever been to a class reunion, then you know what one of these looks like. It's the old name tag. Do you think God knows everybody's name? I knew Jeff would say that. Jeff wasn't at the first service and people were scared to answer. Hey, Jeff, you think God knows your name? Yes, sir, he does. He loves you too, Jeff, just like I do. But I believe God knows our name. Do you think God needs a name tag for us? No, I don't think so. Now, before you assume that you can get all the Sunday go to church answers on this one, think about it. There are somewhere around 7 billion people on planet Earth right now. And believe it or not, today, 360,000 new humans are going to be born. Today. Do you believe God knows them all? Jeff? Yeah, by name. Pete, let me tell you what you're going to love about Jeff. When Jeff's in the room, there are no rhetorical questions. I love it. I mean, Jeff, see, yeah. Yes, sir, Jeff. Y'all got that? You know, that's his energy, his enthusiasm, and the right answers about everything. I'm just going to tell you. Every now and then somebody will say, Bob, does God know everything? And I'll sometimes say, you know, there's some good news and bad news. The good news is God knows everything about you. The bad news is, yeah, God knows about the hopes that we have, the dreams that keep us alive. Have you ever had a nightmare and you were wide awake? I have. God knows about those moments. He knows about our failures that trouble us. He knows about life when a season is so stinking dark that it feels like we're just stumbling around in the blackness of the. He knows about that. God knows everything about you, and you don't have to be threatened by that. In fact, let me tell you about Jesus. He wants to be. Watch this. Jesus wants to be closer to you than he used to be. You got to get that. But sometimes you have to go out on a limb and you find yourself out on a limb and there's no place to go, and then Jesus can finally catch up to you. Let me show you how this works. In our study today, we're going to watch Jesus interact with a guy, and this guy's got a shipwreck past, checkered past. This guy's going to make some of y'all look like a altar boy or a Girl Scout. I'm not kidding you. Look at this map. Let me orient you really fast. You know this is Israel. You have 3 regions. You've got Judea in the south, Galilee up north, and then Samaria is this land in between. Jesus was raised here in Nazareth. But today we're going to spend our time in this small southern Judean town called Jericho. And notice that typically the roads, this dotted line here, if you can see it maybe on the big map there, this was in the Jordan River Valley, so this was a lot of hill country here. It was the easiest route that people had to take. By the way, Jericho, did you know that Jericho is the oldest city on planet Earth still in existence? It's about 10,000 years old. Now let that blow your mind. A couple of thousand years ago, there was a baby boy born right here in the city of Jericho. And when his parents carried him over to the village priest, they were going to do the religious duty of having him circumcised. His parents wrote on his birth certificate, his name will be Zacchaeus. Now, I'm pretty sure his parents never imagined that their boy would grow up someday and become an agent with the Internal Revenue Service. Probably not. Working for an occupying country of Rome. I've given you background about tax collectors many times, but just a quick reminder. Don't forget that first century Israel, this land of Israel, was an occupied country. They had been conquered by the Romans in 63 BC, about 6 decades before Jesus, and they dominated the country of Israel for the next 539 years. And the only way that the Romans had of maintaining their command and control was through an aggressive taxation system. If you know a little bit about world history at the time of Jesus, then you know that they basically had one golden rule. Those who have the gold always get to make the rules, and that's the way it was. And Rome was pretty strong. For example, when they decided that they were going to conquer the entire known world, really toward the beginning of the first century, they ended up being the biggest and the baddest of all around. This map I've shown you many times before represents the Roman Empire. So everything kind of in this dark red area. And when Jesus was walking on planet Earth, this was the extent of the Roman Empire. So they basically had the entire Mediterranean rim. It was all theirs. Now, when you have that kind of domination, you need a large amount of money. You certainly you got infrastructure issues, and they were huge. The Romans were known to be expert civil engineers, and they built an enviable highway system all over their empire. Not to mention that it takes an extraordinary amount of money to maintain a large and well-equipped military to be able to create a command and control in this entire region. And so what was the answer to that? Can you say taxes? Lots and lots of taxes. So they needed a broad tax base. Here's how it worked. The Romans would conquer an area like Israel, which is right here, and then they would overpower the people with some strong armed tactics. They would appoint a governor and say, okay, you will be over this region. Think Pontius Pilate, he was a governor. And instead of sending their own people out to do the tax collection, they would recruit some of the locals to do the dirty work. So if you had any interest in having a job with the government, it was a lucrative vocation to be a tax collector. You might apply for the job. If your application was to be accepted, then hey, you're now a wealthy tax collector. And the way it worked is you would submit a bid to the Roman governor. This is how much money I think I can collect by any means necessary. And if it was suitable, then the governor would give you the rights to begin to do that. And so anything that you could extract from the people above what your contract agreement was, that was yours to keep. They would get the quota, and then whatever you wanted to do, it was yours to keep. Was there money in this? Good money. This was a very productive vocation. Not exactly a good way, though, to win your friends and influence your neighbors and the people on your street. These were people who had known Zacchaeus from the day he was born, and now he's a disgusting cheat of a tax collector. Think about that for a minute. Legalized extortion, coercive bullying. You do it whatever way you want to in the first degree. Tax collectors, some of the most hated people in their day. In fact, so much so that they actually had to have bodyguards. Can you imagine an IRS agent needing a bodyguard, like a secret service? If that's not bad enough, check this out. Luke 19. Jesus entered Jericho and made his way through the town. There was a man there named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector in the region, and he had become very rich. Zacchaeus was the chief tax collector. What that means is he was an independent contractor, so he would hire other people to do some of the dirty work. And Luke says he was very rich. The dude was loaded. He was like the poster child of wealth and success. He was powerful, rich, infamous, lonely, and seriously lost spiritually. There's a price to pay, you see, sometimes when you gain that type of inappropriate notoriety. I wonder how many times, you ever wonder about this when Zacchaeus might have said, wow, I've got money, I've got power. Is this all there is? Is there anything else in this life? How do I know that? How do I know that he might have asked that question? Because we are about to find out that there was something seriously missing at the center of his life. Now, it's obvious that Zacchaeus knew something about Jesus, but now remember, by this time, Jesus is well into his public ministry, so his reputation was always ahead of him wherever he traveled. And I'm sure that it had trickled down to Jericho. The headquarters of Jesus is right here in Capernaum, which is on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee. But by this time, the word about Jesus had hit his fame and his teaching ability, his miracles, and so had certainly spread down to Jericho. There's about 100 miles there, so that's a pretty big deal back in those days when they didn't have there was no social media or anything like that. I even wonder if Zacchaeus might have said, hey, I've heard about this guy. This man Jesus. I know about him. In fact, what if Zacchaeus said, one of the guys that hangs out with Jesus was a tax collector, the guy named Matthew. So who knows what might happen. Well, for whatever reason, Zacchaeus finds himself on Main Street on the same day that this teacher is coming through town, this rabbi. And here's how Luke describes it. Jesus entered Jericho and made his way through the town. There was a man there named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector in the region, and he had become very rich. He tried to get a look at Jesus, but he was too short to see over the crowd, so he ran ahead, climbed a sycamore tree, a fig tree, beside the road, for Jesus was going to pass that way. Why sycamore tree, you say? Well, mostly because sycamore trees have some pretty broad limbs near the ground. And so here's this little short guy, prominent business leader, not to mention a notorious tax agent. And what happens next is not something that you could make up even if you wanted to. So here's Jesus, relatively popular teacher. He's a compelling communicator, brilliant leader. Zacchaeus has probably heard about him, and Jesus stops in his tracks. He's coming through town. For the first time in a long time, somebody actually looked up to Zacchaeus. Let's let that settle on you there for a minute. Yeah, it wasn't very funny, but watch this. When Jesus got there, he looked up and said, hey, Zacchaeus, hurry down. I want to stay with you today. What? Oh, hey, wait a minute, Jesus. How did you know the guy's name? Well, I can imagine that he must have leaned over to somebody and said, hey, who's the dude up the tree? That little short guy. But Jesus, you don't know him. He's a conniving, double-crossing crook. You don't know this man. You don't know how he gets to maintain his lucrative lifestyle, but we're the ones who are paying for this. Collaborates with this greedy Roman government. Keeps us in a permanent state of scarcity and economic recession. So when Jesus said, hey, I think I'm going to come over to your house and we probably ought to talk. And Jesus is about ready to violate every religious protocol in the book. But here's what happens when our ministry strategies just start to work opposite of who Jesus made us to be. Here's what people tend to do. Insulate. We insulate ourselves. We separate ourselves. We isolate ourselves, and then we segregate ourselves. It's an awful strategy. I mean, Jesus, whatever you do, don't risk your whole future, your whole reputation. Don't rub shoulders with this two-faced, double-crossing, despicable loser. Don't do it. But he finds Zacchaeus with no place to run, out on the limb, verse 7. The people were displeased. Imagine that. He, Jesus, has gone to be the guest of a notorious sinner. That word notorious means devoted. I'm talking devoted sinner. They grumbled. For the first time in this sequence of events, you start to get, now Jesus is opening the door so we can get a glimpse of the gospel. Jesus knows about tax collectors. He's known about it his entire life. In fact, he's got a guy on his team who used to be a tax collector, Matthew. Hey, Zacchaeus, let's go over to your house. I need to talk to you. I'm going to show you a different way to live. I'm going to show you the alternative way to live. Zacchaeus desperately needs to hear a message. Is there a message out there for somebody who needs a second, third, fourth chance? Is there anybody that needs to have the assurance of forgiveness? And does anybody need to be restored to their once upon time relationship with God? Well, we're not given a lot of the detail. Luke doesn't give us any details, but here Jesus responded. He goes and hangs out with Zacchaeus, and then he simply says, salvation has come to this house today. Reconciliation has happened here. What does that mean? For the Son of Man, Jesus said, came to seek and save those who are lost, out on a limb with no place to go. Jesus said, I'm on a search and rescue mission, Zacchaeus, and I'm looking for hopeless people who have found life to be helpless and stuck on a limb. You know what? I'll wager with you that somebody came to this church today just so that you could be reminded of what I just said. You just needed that reminder that if there's some hopelessness or helplessness, it's not the end of the road for you. It might be whatever that thing was that happened last month, or that decision that you made a couple of years ago, or maybe those painful and destructive words that came spewing out of you in anger last night. It could be a careless, reckless choice that you made just last week. It might be that you showed up here today and you're just smothered with regret and guilt and shame, and the last person that you would want to know about it would be Jesus. But he knows about it. Let me illustrate. Names matter. Zacchaeus, names matter. Our parents gave us names because names are important. But shortly after we're born, at least in our day, it seems like everything shifts over from names to numbers. Surely you've noticed that. And then we start to play the numbers game, don't we? These days, it seems like people in our world, they just want to know your number. What's your number? You notice that, right? For example, you call your doctor to make an appointment. And what does the scheduler say? I need your number. You stop by the pharmacy to pick up a prescription and you say your name. What's the first thing they ask? When's your birthday? That's right. A few weeks ago, I had to get a prescription filled, and the woman behind the counter, she was buzzing. I mean, she was distracted and busy, and so she never looked up. She said, sir, do you know your birthday? And I said, yes. She never flinched. She just kept right on going. And then all of a sudden, she kind of caught herself, and she said, well, can you tell me? And I said, yeah. Are you asking? No, actually, I said, I thought you'd never ask. These days, we have Social Security numbers, PIN numbers, phone numbers, student ID numbers, passport numbers. Some of us have dozens of passwords that require, you know what they'll say, at least have one number in there somewhere. We have driver's license numbers. Students keep close tabs on their GPA numbers. I have a locker over at the YMCA. It's got a number right there. This time of year, high school seniors, they're all anxious to start seeing their SAT scores, their numbers. Occasionally, somebody they know I'm invested with Elon football, and they'll say, well, do you know such and such a kid? And I said, yeah, I know all the kids. What's his number? Because I know all the kids better by their number. Usually about Wednesday or Thursday of every week during football season, I'll call our head coach and he and our buddies, and I'll say, all right, so what are we looking at come Saturday? And he'll say, and so I called this past week, Thursday, I think. And I said, okay, who are we looking at this week? And he gave me 4 numbers, number 80, 26, 49, and 33. They're all really good, he said. Well, I watched him yesterday from New Hampshire. They were good, but we won anyway. So that's just, okay, so y'all don't care as much as I do. There you go. See, you were there, weren't you, Doyle? That's right. Yeah, but we're all in, you know, when we go to the doctor for our annual checkup and physical and stuff, you know, we're very interested in the doc going over the lab work. We want to know our lab numbers. We watch the stock market numbers, and they're all over the place. Some people want to know, so how many followers do you have? You got Facebook, Twitter, Instagram followers. I've lost count the number of people who say, so how many members do you have at SMC? I don't know. I guess there's a way to find out, but we don't count members. We typically count disciples because they're typically more invested. But we'll say numbers don't lie, crunch the numbers. We need to increase our numbers. Come on, it's a numbers game. I recently asked our CEO, I said, can you just give it to me in a round number and stuff? But numbers represent who we are, even though it doesn't make a whole lot of difference to anybody else. Look at this series of numbers. Those numbers mean absolutely nothing to you. Nothing. I mean, you don't even know what they are. But those numbers right there represent my phone number, my wedding anniversary, my cholesterol at my last physical, when I gave my life to Christ, my current weight, my birthday, our house number, even my lucky number is in there. How many times I worked out this week? The year I started working at SMC. You get my drift? Numbers mean something to you and to me. They just don't define our life. It's that name that we go by. We were given a name, and names mean something. For example, when I think back over the course of my life, and there were a number of people who stepped in, God gave them, I'm sure, but God put them in the pathway of my life at certain times, and they were influencers, and they were critical to meeting me at those intersections and helping me navigate. Teachers, coaches, encouragers, pastors, mentors, counselors, my parents. So many friends, I've lost count. Probably a couple of thousand people here at SMC who have encouraged me. Even people, every now and then somebody will stand in opposition to your leadership. And those people taught me some things too, even though it wasn't quite as much fun, but that's for another day. It's the scores of people over the years who in some way, whatever way they were able to do it, said, Bob, come on, you can do this. You can figure this out. You can go for it. You can reach higher. You can try again. You can be successful the next time. You can't quit right now. Bob, don't let a series of failures define who you are. So one of the 12 disciples, here's a man who, my gosh, he assumed a lot of leadership in the circle of disciples. He was confident and fearless. And he was probably the oldest guy in the group, with the exception Jesus might have been the oldest, I would think, but this guy was probably next in line. Here was a man who was aggressive, sometimes hot-headed. Once in a while, he would just be recklessly arrogant and say things without thinking. He was typically the first to speak out, to step up, to call out, and quite frankly, he was one of the first to bail out a couple of times when Jesus needed him the most. Jesus spent a disproportionate amount of time with this man. You know who I'm talking about? What's his name? No. His name is Simon. Now, Jesus gave him a nickname, Peter, which meant Rocky. Simon. Simon, who would one day give an absolute bold denial. I don't even know who the man is, he said. And yet a week or so later, Jesus forgave, restored, and put him in a strategic leadership position for the future of the movement. Here was this impulsive man, first to speak up and one of the first to back down when the pressure was on, Peter. That's his name, Simon Peter, who ended up being a loud, aggressive follower, helped transform the movement as we know it today. In fact, if you read the book of Acts chapter 2, you see the very first sermon in Christian history, first Christian sermon ever given by Peter. It'll rock your day. It'll rock your world. It was one of the most courageous sermons that you'll ever read. And it might all be tracked back to one day when Jesus was walking along the shores of the Sea of Galilee near Capernaum, and he saw these two fishermen, these brothers, and he said, hey, Simon, follow me. Go with me. Learn from me. And now we know the rest of the story. What about Moses? Totally disqualified, really, or I should say unqualified, to lead the great freedom movement. Wasn't a great leader. Wasn't a good public speaker. None of those things. God didn't say, hey, don't worry about it, Moses. I'll make you stronger and better, and you'll be creative. And no. God didn't say any of that. Do you remember what God said to Moses? Same thing he said to Simon and Andrew, brothers. Same thing he said to Zacchaeus. He said it later to Paul. He said it to dozens of you before you were deployed. He said it to me. Do you remember what he said? I'll be with you. Go with me. I'll be with you. Same thing God said to me 49 years ago. I just felt this strong voice of God calling me to full-time ministry. I knew no way I was adequate, no way. But God said, Bob, take my yoke on you. We'll go together, and I'll be right by your side. Same thing that God spoke to a small group of German-speaking immigrants, 31 people who gathered on that cold January day in 1855. And God said, you go, SMC, and I'll go with you. When this church was organized in January of 1855, our country, as you know, was covered in the quagmire of slavery. But there was one man born in the state of Illinois during that era of American history. And he started reading with great interest about a young British man by the name of William Wilberforce, who was disgusted with slavery in Great Britain, and he was a member of the parliament, and he was determined that he was going to eradicate that curse from their land. It took Wilberforce his entire life. In fact, they signed the Abolition of Slavery Act in Great Britain just 3 days before Wilberforce passed away. That was July 1833. Well, the man I'm talking about was a young politician who was 38 years old when he was first involved in politics. Abraham Lincoln was his name, and I've read a lot of biographies. One of my favorites is Ed Acorn's biography called Every Drop of Blood. He tells a powerful story of that Lincoln decided one day as a young man, he had heard about a slave auction in his town, and so he went to it. He wanted to find out what it was all about. And he saw this young slave girl. She was a 15-year-old kid, and she was standing on the auction block when the bidding started. Abraham Lincoln said, something broke in me that day. Something broke. So he started bidding on this girl. And he was the high bidder. So when this 15-year-old kid stepped off the block, he looked at the slave master, Mr. Lincoln did, and said, take the chains off of her. And he looked at the girl and said, you are free. And she said, free? I don't know what that means, sir. What does it mean to be free? And Mr. Lincoln said, it means that you can go anywhere you want to. And tears started streaming down her face. And she said then, sir, I'll go with you because you're the person who set me free. Jesus said to Zacchaeus, take your chains off. You are free. He said to Peter, hey, Rocky, you can't serve me in chains. Take the chains off. You go tell my story to as many people as you can. Jesus said to me 50 years ago, a 17-year-old high school kid, Bob, I love you like a son, but I'll tell you something. I just need you to go tell my redemptive story. You tell people how I abolished the slavery of sin. Remember when God showed up, when you might have been on the end of the take your chains off. I don't think a week ever goes by, really, without somebody saying to me, Bob, I need God to fix what's broken. I've got this struggling marriage. I have a wayward teenager. My job is just drains the life out of me. I'm in a financial mess and I can't get out. This addiction is destroying my life and the people around me. The dementia. My wife has dementia, and it's taking her away from me a day at a time. My aging parent has run out of options. What do we do now? This mental illness that has my 20-something-year-old all bound up, paralyzed. The seriousness of these reckless decisions that I made. There's grief that's tearing a gigantic hole in my heart one piece at a time. Can Jesus fix it? And all I can say is with absolute certainty is, you need somebody to change you. And Jesus happens to be a specialist. For way too long, everybody, the message of the church was, hey, change your life and then you come and be a part of who we are. And Jesus said, no, go with me. Follow me. You'll change. Jesus can change this world. He came here to do that. One life at a time. So maybe, might be your time. If it is, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll meet you out there on the end of the limb when he calls your name. I love you, SMC.